All right, you cannot look me in the eyes. You see my eyes, your eyes? That's the best. It's a duck. It's quack.
It's a duck.
It's Donald Duck.
The cat is like a little thief.
That is a
The cat is a little thief.
That is just
He's just a little dude. He's a little dude. He's a little dude.
Who's a little dude?
The cat is a little dude.
It makes sense. The cat bipedal.
Welcome to Critical Damage. Welcome, gamers, to Critical Damage Season 4. Now, after some stuff happened, I think us hosts just need to... Anyway, welcome to Episode 3, where we have a great show in store for you guys today. Us at Critical Damage, Emerson College's #1 esports talk show. To begin, let's talk about game series, and let's talk about innovation. Innovation in game series is something that I think as gamers we can agree on is kind of a good thing. But do we think it's good overall for any audience? Let's talk about games themselves. In franchises, do we like a form that kind of just repeats, or do we like innovation?
I mean, franchises are huge. Franchises are one of those cool things about video games where you get to see your favorite characters just continue doing things and continue playing games with your favorite characters in them. And honestly, my favorite franchise, as you could probably tell, it's got to be Pokemon. And I think Pokemon is a great example, given that it's the biggest media franchise in the world. Because of that, it's appealed to so many different people, but because of that, how is it going to innovate? You got to make sure you keep as many people happy as possible while also not straying too far from the core formula.
I think Pokemon does a pretty good job of that, though, when it comes to giving like small innovations. Because like Pokemon XY, they give you Mega Evolutions with that really sick bracelet. Like you get your options when it comes to every year getting new ones, getting some sort of new innovation. Not necessarily something super big, but enough to where we feel like we're playing a new game, we're getting a new experience with these new Pokemon and this new concept and all that sort of thing.
I think Pokemon's cool. I mean, like, especially in like Sword and Shield, giving quality of life changes, accessing the box on the road is so much easier just to play Pokemon in general. I feel like they innovate in a great way while also keeping to their status quo.
100% agree.
I think...
All you.
Thank you. I think Monster Hunter also does a pretty good job of understanding their franchise and understanding what their audience wants and adding in new innovation. I have yet to play Rise, so I can't talk about Rise. But Iceborne, they give you some claw traps you can use to like weaken your target. Just like grab onto them and just bash their head in or whatever you need to do to like weaken that part, which I think is really cool. Bunch of new monsters to fight up against, entirely new terrain. So same concept. You're still hunting after the monster, getting your parts that you need, so on and so forth, furthering the plot. But it's slight new changes that are adding innovation.
All right, so then let's try to frame this more as an either or. Do we think one is kind of superior to the other? Let's look at Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was a great game, but it really kind of broke the Zelda status quo. I mean, like Zelda was known for that kind of top-down, kind of two-dimensional format. And then Breath of the Wild comes around, it's open world, huge 3D, amazing landscapes, good innovation.
I think it depends on the franchise. I mean, Breath of the Wild is a great example of a series that innovated in a way that everyone thought fit for the series. Breath of the Wild is one of those adventure games where it just makes sense to do an open world. It makes sense to have an open world where you can go wherever you want, look at all these cool little shrines and secrets to explore. It just makes sense. For games that, like Pokemon, it doesn't really make sense to change the core gameplay up too much, right? Because it's Pokemon. People play Pokemon because they want to play the core gameplay of Pokemon. There's no real need to change up the core formula that much, and that's why they innovate in other ways. These smaller changes that actually alter the core gameplay in ways that make it feel fresh and new without actually changing it too much, but you still got to keep that same core gameplay for Pokemon.
You know, normally you don't want to stray too far from that core expectation, because if you do, then your audience may be like, oh, this has gone too far, and now I no longer like it. Especially with something that's been around for so long and it's become such a classic. It can be really concerning if you stray too far. Zelda did a really good job in how they strayed, in which you're totally right. Like, people want to explore their strengths, people want to see that experience. But I feel like if certain games were to do that and stray a little bit too far, they could lose a lot of their audience that they're looking for.
Yeah, I feel like games like specifically maybe like FIFA. I mean, like their game kind of, in my opinion, just feels like the same game year after year. But you have to respect the fact that FIFA's a soccer game. You can't really do mass innovations to a game that's based around one concept, especially those returning customers. They're there to buy FIFA. If you rip FIFA out of the ground and give it a whole new format, it's not FIFA anymore.
Yeah, it's FIFA, it's soccer. You buy the game because you want to play soccer with all the players you watch, and that's that. If you really want an innovative soccer game, just play Rocket League, because if you want to have these giant soccer ball with all these rocket-powered cars, there's your innovation for soccer that you need. Otherwise, just play FIFA, It's simple, but there's nothing really wrong with that. One could argue that the pricing structure could be changed, but I mean, that's the case with most games out there, so.
I will say though, Pokemon has had some decent innovation when it comes to at least their variety that they offer. Because I think we're mainly talking about like Pokemon, like going out as a trainer, defeating the Elite Four, all that sort of thing.
The main series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they also have Pokemon Ranger, Mystery Dungeons, Legends of Arceus. They have a bigger variety of things you can go out and do now, as opposed to just in trainer. And they've had that going on for a while. I don't know how often they update those ones, but you do get options.
Okay, so let's try to change our discussion, moving away from franchises and their innovation. Let's talk about their audiences. I mean, like, as an audience of a game, you're kind of going to buy a game. But let's be honest, all of us are aging. Some of us are playing video games more or less than we did a couple years ago. Look at like companies' marketing strategies. Should they innovate for new audience? Should that be their target for innovation?
I mean, at the end of the day, companies want money. That's by far the biggest drive for how they market, how they create the games. It's by far the biggest factor in all of that. So no matter what, they're just going to try to market it in the way in which they get the most money out of it. In terms of actually developing the games, again, consider something like Pokemon, because I know it's been said to death, but Pokemon is a children's game at heart. It's created and developed for kids, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That doesn't mean adults can't play it and enjoy it, but it's important to keep that in mind, especially when talking about like specific gameplay like around that, because if it's developed for a specific audience, then that's sort of the audience they're going to go for. And because of that, you got to be careful, because these other audiences that may continue to play the game, but it's not necessarily the target audience of the developers, they may get upset that they're not getting as much attention and the games aren't necessarily like being developed for them.
Okay, so your thought process is that games shouldn't really go for that like multi-audience format. It should just be like, this is the target audience and we might hit other markets. They shouldn't really advertise for two separate markets.
I mean, it depends on the game. Like, obviously, what Pokemon's doing is working. It's creating games for children, but also makes it accessible to literally anybody. Anyone can pick up a Pokemon game and learn how to play it, and it'll be great fun. Again, depending on the game, I think it's important to recognize the target audience that they're going for, and when criticizing a game based on its development or based on how like specific gameplay mechanics, to consider what their target audience might be when developing it. Not to say that games shouldn't develop for a wide audience. I think games being more accessible is the ideal, but it's important to keep that in mind at least.
I see another pretty solid example is, I don't know if you guys have played it, but Animal Crossing.
I've never heard of that game, actually.
But like,
really sleeper pick.
it's kept pretty consistent with the theme, and like, you have a bunch of the same villagers, but there's a nostalgia factor when it comes to seeing all these old villagers from, especially like where we've been at, where I think like a lot of us started off on like the first games, seeing like Walt from like the first game up to now and like New Horizons, being like, oh my God, it's my favorite. I'm just going for mine. But I think there's something to say about having a nostalgia factor when it comes to growth, in a way where you're keeping that classic, what do people want? What is my audience going to want? And how can I market that without having to put too much development in? Because the more development time you have, the longer it's going to take for that game to get out, money's going to go down.
All right, I think nostalgia factor is actually like a big part of games. Like Pokemon is a great one, but like Call of Duty. I mean, I played Call of Duty when I was younger. I don't want to buy a new Call of Duty game and all of a sudden I'm playing a completely different game. That just feels weird. But okay, our last topic of discussion. How do leaks affect game developers? are they good or are they the worst thing imaginable?
Leaks are such a tricky subject. I mean, especially depending on the game, you have leaks where it's like you're leaking the entire game before it's even come out, where you have like the files and everything of like the gameplay, every single thing about the game is already out in the public before it's even been released. We saw that with GTA 6, actually, not GTA 5. That's been out for too many years. GTA 6, the entire game basically got leaked ahead of time, and it wasn't even finished. And then everyone was like, why is this game not look good? But that's because it isn't finished. But then you have these smaller leaks for games, like, again, take Pokemon, where you leak like a couple Pokemon ahead of time. I know the starter evolutions leak always ahead of time as well. And because of that, it's tough because people may want to see that beforehand, and that gives them more hype to the game, especially depending on how the developers actually market the game. Because if you don't market your game, no one's going to want to buy it. No one's going to know it exists, and no one's going to be interested in the first place. So leaks actually give sort of another way of marketing the game as well.
All right. Well, I think leaks are probably a good place to wrap this discussion up. Pokemon, I feel like, does the leaks the best, but those are kind of intentional. But for now, let's wrap it up. Let's throw over to Jack Reiber with First Frame News.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone, and welcome to First Frame News. My name is Jack Reiber, and I'll be walking you through the biggest headlines in the gaming world. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 launched to thunderous success earlier this month, earning $1 billion within 10 days of its launch and becoming the best-selling Call of Duty game on opening weekend. Jack Link's Beef Jerky released a product tie-in where players can get a code for in-game XP for every bag of jerky they get. Some players have seized the opportunity for free XP by raiding local Walmarts and scanning all the XP codes without buying any jerky. So if you're wondering what cheating tastes like, it tastes like beef jerky. Halo Infinite launches its third season, and with it comes a plethora of new features and updates. Developer 343 Industries added a brand new 30-tier battle pass, 2 new maps, a capture the flag game mode, 4-player co-op on the campaign, and the series staple Forge finally returns. Additionally, 343 added Match XP, which completely changes how players progress through Halo Infinite's Battle Pass. Before Season 3, players had to complete challenges to get XP, and now, players get XP for performing well in a match, like getting triple kills or getting headshots, as well as completing challenges. Players get rewarded for playing the game now, and this resolves a long-time issue fans have had with the game. And Infinite isn't the only Halo game getting a makeover. Halo modder Inferno Plus created a multiplayer map pack for Halo 3, aptly named HaloCraft. This mod combines the gameplay of Halo 3 with the destructive environment of Minecraft. Not only did Inferno Plus manage to merge two wildly contrasting different games, but the modder also innovated on the core gameplay of the Halo series. HaloCraft features destructive environments, which has never been done before in a Halo game. This innovation has proven to be a brilliant one, and 343 should take some notes. Now, before we move on to our final story, I want to get a little sentimental with you. My first ever topic I talked about on Critical Damage was Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl, a platform fighter developed by Ludosity, the same team behind Slap City. In a time where Smash Bros. Ultimate was in a lull and rollback netcode was rare, Nick All-Stars Brawl looked like a smash hit on the way. And only 1 year later, the game is dead. The game's player base dropped to 10 people on PC in July, and consistent players complain about how long it takes to get in a match. Despite being a technically impressive fighting game with in-depth mechanics and multiple updates throughout its lifetime, there just aren't a lot of people playing the game. You had a good run, Nick, but I bid you adieu. And on to our final story. Riot Games launches its Rising Stars tournament. Rising Stars is a League of Legends tournament composed of female-led esports teams across Europe. In Riot's official announcement of the tournament, they said they aim to, quote, promote inclusion and opportunities in esports, end quote, by having all competing teams be, quote, entirely composed of women, end quote. The Rising Stars tournament is scheduled for November 22nd and 23rd in 2023. Okay, that's all the time I've got. I gotta get back to playing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet for my Nintendo Switch, because Fuecoco is the best start of this generation. My name is Jack Reiber, this is First Frame News, and I'm sending it back to you, Mike.
All right, well, thank you, Jack. Fuecoco, I'll admit, it's probably got the best final evolution, but don't even. But moving on from Pokemon, let's go to esports, because we just had the big tournaments end recently. Overwatch League championships, Dallas Fuel took it home, and you got that other one, that League Worlds or whatever.
Pretty small,
Pretty small thing. Only a lot of viewers. So let's talk about players in esports. What makes a good esports player? Do they have to stream? Do they have to be entertaining?
I mean, I think there's two main factors when it comes to esports players and what makes them good esports players, if that makes sense. I think what you brought up is a very good point in that streaming and personality. And players having personality is what drives esports, because why watch if you're not going to watch your favorite players pop off when they win? But also, players being good is another big factor. You want to watch the best players in the sport. That's why esports is so big, because you get to actually watch the game that you play all the time, and you get to see the best people in the world actually play it at the highest level. And I think that's another really good point in terms of what makes a good esports player. I think having a balance of the two is honestly ideal. But it's okay if you don't have one or the other. That doesn't make anyone a bad esports player because of that.
I am going to add an important third, especially when it comes to just esports industry and having good players, is they need to have good reputation. If you're going to hire someone, you want to make sure that they're representing your company well and that they're going to represent their team well, because if they don't, then that can lead you to a bunch of controversy on your own organization.
Yeah, controversy is just not the greatest when it comes to esports. I mean, let's look at something controversial. My expertise in the Overwatch League, at least in the opening season. So I'll reference the Overwatch League Season 1 Dallas Fuel. They made a streamer team. That team has some really great players, don't get me wrong. But they've got people like Seagull, XQC, just don't get me wrong, they're not bad players. Seagull's been in the contenders scene. He's been in since early Overwatch. XQC's a very good player. But at the end of the day, they're probably not the greatest players on the planet. They're entertainers. And Dallas Fuel suffered because of that. They had one of the worst performances in the first season of the Overwatch League because they chose entertainers over some of the greatest players on the planet. Now compare that to Vancouver Titans, Season 2 of Overwatch League. A team that was added late, they was added as an expansion franchise, goes on to sweep most of the entire league until the Overwatch League championships, where they eventually lose to San Francisco Shock. But their team, they didn't pick streamers like the Dallas Fuel did. They just picked up Runaway, a very successful contenders team, signed them to the Overwatch League, and let them loose in GOATs. And I feel like that is the ultimate showcase of, at the end of the day in esports, you gotta be good at the game.
I mean, that's a very good point as well, is that the Runaway Titans, one of the greatest, Overwatch teams to ever exist, that was what was so interesting about watching them, was that they weren't streamers. They didn't really have a bunch of very outgoing, outward personalities. They just showed up, they played the game, and they played it well.
They destroyed.
They had the longest win streak in all of Overwatch League history up until the San Francisco Shock just got it this last season. It carried over for the season, so it's a little iffy. But yeah, that was what was so amazing about the Vancouver Titans. That's why everyone loved them as players, because they were just so confident in what they did, and they used that to their advantage. And that's what everyone considers them such good esports players in the first place. They don't necessarily need to be these big streamers. But then on the other hand, you have players like Super, who was on the San Francisco Shock, and he is not only an amazing player, but he's also a streamer, and he also has a personality that, everybody loves or hates. Everyone loves to hate at some point. But I think that's also another good example of someone who's not necessarily a bad esports player, but a really good one of the best that we've had in the league. But also, they have that streamer personality, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It helps gives more spice to the league. It helps, get some drama going, which can be healthy for the league at times as well.
It'd be really funny. I remember, I can't remember what competition it was, when they had all the computers facing each other and a bunch of Overwatch players saw an opportunity just to mess with each other, and they just went, yes, if I lose, I'm just going to throw myself at the support player across from me. It was so funny. And that interaction with the audience is something that I love, because people get busy, and I think some of us forget that these are 20-year-olds. A lot of them are younger players. They're not full industry career people. So they may not have the time to be doing constantly streaming and keeping up with their gameplay and just keeping up on all of those handles. But like those fun little interactions they can have with their audience shows like, oh, hey, this is a funny guy. I really like what he has to say, and he's a really good player, and he's not a douche. So like,
Oh yeah. On that same note, actually, I think it's that point of these beasts basically being like kids, you know, like less than 20 years old, around 20 years old. Esports players, professional players, tend to be on the younger side as well, and because of that, they've been jumping right into the scene after playing basically their entire lives of video games, and they may not necessarily want to stream because of that. They may not necessarily go out as much, and they may spend all their time inside playing, and that's why they're so good, and that's why they're in the league in the first place. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad player. It's, you know, they're kids. You can't really blame them for that.
All right, so moving on from the players themselves, let's talk about esports. We're talking about how it's very young. Like esports hasn't really been a big thing. Overwatch League is only on its 4th season, its 5th coming out, hopefully. But like, what does the future esports look like? Do we have any ideas?
not crypto.
Not crypto.
You can tell off of what's happened with FTX.
Oh, God.
So many people are having to cut themselves off. I know TSM recently just posted their little announcement saying that they've officially ended their partnership with FTX. But I think things are looking pretty good. Owl just released a bunch of players, like the teams, because I think they're just looking for who's going to be good for this new game that they've just made that they're now competing in Overwatch 2. League's doing good. I can't say much about Valorant. I don't know Valorant.
Valorant's definitely doing well.
They're on the up and up. They've got so much going. League just hosted their World Championships, hit record high viewer counts. Overwatch League is rebounding after their dip, like the Butterfingers. That was so funny to be watching the Overwatch League Championships and just see Butterfinger on the side of a building.
And that's huge. Sponsors are huge for esports. Sponsors are what keep esports afloat and keep these leagues going. And yeah, it's funny to see a Butterfinger on the side of a wall when you're watching this intense team fight in the finals of the Overwatch League. But it's silly, but it's necessary in a way, because Overwatch League wouldn't happen if sponsors didn't exist. And it's the same for League, it's the same for Valorant, it's the same for every esports championship. And sponsors are really what drive esports, and because of that, esports needs to make itself appealing to as many people as possible, in my opinion, in order to get those sponsors to invest.
You know, honestly, just with the amount of sponsors that we're seeing, which is many, it shows how good the league is doing. Because if you have a bunch of sponsors going, you're able to do a bunch more things, you're able to keep revenue going, you're able to market towards your audience better. It's just a whole round cycle of just, if we're getting money, we can put more money into this organization, which in turn will get us more money.
Okay, so let's look at game developers then. Game developers kind of have this idea of the league's was successful. Should we implement the game around it? Do you guys think that games right now should be made more for esports viewing potential? Or should we kind of just let esports exist and we're making the game to be the game?
I think games should stay games first and foremost. Their main target should be to entertain and to give people a fun story or a fun experience. It shouldn't be so much to how much profit can I make from esports. Obviously, there are some games that'll have that in mind of like, oh, hey, my fighting game turns out to have a pretty good opportunity for esports. Maybe I'll start advertising it to people who are in esports or collegiate players or that sort of thing so that I can get that sort of audience going, but not so much in a way where it's detracting from the game and just focusing on esports.
No, yeah, I think that's a very good point, because at the end of the day, the more people playing the game are, you know, just your average player. And a lot of people complain about games that specifically balance around the professional scene and how that's not necessarily healthy for the ranked ladder of the game, which is important to know because that's a majority of your player base. I think there are ways to integrate esports into specific esports like games without necessarily, you know, screwing over the whole player base. Like for Overwatch, you know, if you want to integrate ways to make it easier to watch the Overwatch League or more incentives or rewards for watching the Overwatch League, that will help grow the esport healthily while also not sacrificing the actual gameplay of just playing from day to day.
Well, profitability and advertisers, I feel like has to be a major thing we're talking about in esports. We brought it up briefly with Butterfingers and crypto, but I don't know. I kind of like the idea of Overwatch and just esports in general existing without this kind of like peg up from sponsors. But Do we think that's reasonable?
I don't think
That's a
esports
strong
is
reaction.
in a place where they can be without sponsors, because sponsors are so much of their way where they can get money to keep it going. If esports was in a place where like they could just depend on streaming revenue and that sort of thing, then I'd say maybe. But with how big things are getting, sponsors are really important, and having those relationships is really important. I don't think it's so much of a bad thing. I think it's kind of funny when you're like hearing like crunch time and then it's like a Doritos ad or something like that. But it's just a way for them to get what they need and for esports to get what esports needs. It's mutual.
Yeah.
It's a necessary evil, I think. I mean, again, I don't think anyone really wants to see a ton of company logos plastered all over their favorite esports game. But again, it's what keeps the game afloat at the end of the day. And that's really what matters. If they're the reason that these leagues and these esports like tournaments exist, then I think it's worth it. As long as it doesn't get out of hand and they have like full control over how the league is run, which doesn't seem to be the case anyway, then I think we're in a pretty good spot.
I agree. I mean, like, as funny as I think it would be if every wall in Overwatch League had a different company's logo on it, Butterfinger, and then it got a Coca-Cola, and then over there, just like next to a health pack in the middle of nowhere, you got like Chipotle, because they decided that one health pack was theirs. But I think you guys are right. I think that it is a necessary evil. I think it's a great way to put it. I mean, like even looking at League, just signed a huge multi-million-dollar deal with MasterCard. Well, looking at MasterCard, I think that them partnering with League of Legends for a long-term contract for millions really shows that I think sponsorships can work. I think you guys are onto something. But I think we will wrap up Season 4, Episode 3 of Critical Damage here today. I think that we covered everything we want to talk about. Hopefully next week we'll see you guys again, because I'm going to tell you, I'm looking forward to it. You got to be here because we're talking about the Game Awards. Game of the Year nominees, I don't know. We'll be here next week to figure out our picks. All I'm saying, Stray should not be slept on as much as it is. Thank you guys for coming tonight.